The story didn't just break when Teyana Taylor finally spoke up. It fell apart. There were no ambiguous labels or mysterious lyrics, just the unvarnished truth that completely changed people. Perceptions of her silent breakup with Pierre. Because this wasn't about growing apart, Teyana said, it wasn't mutual, and it wasn't about timing, it was treachery, the kind that poisons trust so thoroughly that leaving is the only choice, yet doesn't explode with a big noise. According to insiders, the revelation came as a shock, since it reframed months of conjecture in seconds. It feels more like protection than privacy. What reads as constraint suddenly feels like grace. Teyana was healing, therefore she wasn't quiet. She refrained from speaking, since doing so would have revealed a reality that she wasn't yet prepared to employ as a weapon. Those close to her claim that the treachery was not made public. It took place behind closed doors in times when prudence was expected and devotion was presumed, and the relationship remained intact when that expectation was not met. It was over, tidy, quick, not negotiable. People were most shocked by that. Just a decision, no back and forth, no arc of reconciliation. Immediately, fans began playing back old interviews, old pictures, ancient vitality. The connections started to form. Aaron's quiet garnered pity, but Teyana's emotional weight was weighed down by the imbalance and distance. That stillness didn't seem honorable all of a sudden, it appeared practical. This is the bit that made all the difference. To punish him, Teyana didn't reveal him, she revealed the cause of her departure, because she would have betrayed herself if she had stayed. This was not a narrative about a breakup, it was a narrative about boundaries. And you can't go back to the version you previously thought after hearing what she says next. As soon as Teyana Taylor made the decision to speak in her own voice, the narrative shifted from being hypothetical to becoming individual. This, she explained, was not a case of two individuals gently outgrowing one another or of love gradually fading. It was a breakup that occurred as soon as trust was compromised in a way that was impossible for her to ignore or justify. Teyana's framing has been deliberate. She does not portray the betrayal as explosive or sensational. The culture of gossip is expected. There were no newspaper pictures, no public humiliations, and no spectacular online altercations. And for that reason alone, it cuts so profoundly. She claims that the betrayal took place in a private setting when loyalty is presumed. The area where you think the individual next to you is defending you rather than positioning themselves at your cost. According to people close to Teyana, there was neither a single instance of dishonesty nor infidelity in the conventional sense. It was secrecy combined with misalignment. The knowledge that Pierre was acting in ways that were advantageous to him while exposing her on an emotional, narrative, and reputational level. According to accounts, the realization came suddenly. When it happened, there was no more space for compromise. The thing that most surprised fans was how fast Teyana made her decision. No effort was made to explain it away. No attempt to salvage looks. Those who knew her well say that after she grasped what was going on, she grasped something else equally well. She would have to accept a certain aspect of the relationship in order to stay. That expected her to bear the consequences of someone else's decisions, and she wouldn't do that. Teyana has implied that harshness was not the reason for the betrayal. Convenience was the main factor, on how Aaron could easily take advantage of her presence, discretion, and emotional transparency while keeping a distance that protected him from criticism. She says that imbalance is what ended the connection because it was unsustainable, not because it was malevolent. Fans are starting to understand her meaning in retrospect. It was Teyana whose life and choices were examined. She was supposed to comfort, explain, and take in rumors. In contrast, Aaron's quiet was seen as a sign of maturity, privacy, and dignity, and Teyana, for a while, accepted that interpretation, even at her own expense. Insiders say that's where the real treachery took place. It was more in what Aaron permitted to occur than in what he actually did. He let a story unfold in which his remoteness seemed virtue and her decisiveness looked impetuous. He took advantage of the misunderstanding and let her be misinterpreted, and Teyana was unable to ignore that pattern once she had identified it. She has described the moment of clarity as a quiet realization that the partnership no longer felt mutually responsible. Rather than as an argument, she wasn't only occupying someone's space, she was protecting them from unintended repercussions. She also thinks that such self-erasure should never be necessary for love. The restraint of this revelation is what makes it so disturbing. Beyond her personal experience, Teyana is not naming names. She's not picking a villain. Private conversations are not being described by her. She is merely stating that staying would have required her to violate her personal principles of reciprocity, loyalty, and openness. Those close to her say that once that line was crossed, the choice was made instantly. Emotional negotiations and dramatic aftermath were absent. She took a step back, reassessed, and decided to keep her distance. According to insiders, that decision wasn't chilly. It served as protection. The indicators that fans overlooked are now visible to those who watched the relationship. The absence of mutual framing, the lack of a common narrative, and the way Teyana's emotional presence was apparent while Aaron's stayed vague. It was referred to as privacy at the time. It feels asymmetrical now. In Teyana's story, the entire relationship is reframed as a failure of alignment rather than a loss of love. She presumed reciprocity and entered with openness. He stepped cautiously in, maintaining his suppleness. Although neither strategy is intrinsically incorrect, when they conflict dishonestly, the cost is always borne by someone. Teyana also claimed that she had finished paying it. The most notable aspect of this initial chapter of her narrative is the lack of resentment. She doesn't sound like someone looking for retribution. It sounds as though she is correcting herself while she speaks. Her version of the facts is not intended to damage Aaron's reputation. It's intended to clarify why she left. That contrast is significant because Teyana is providing context in a culture that is accustomed to spectacle. As she puts it, "I didn't quit because I stopped caring. I left because I was self-conscious enough to turn down a situation that demanded me to be quiet while bearing the burden." As this section of her narrative begins, it becomes evident. This was hardly a dramatic breakup. It was a line that was upheld by clarity. Additionally, there isn't a version of love that can endure at the price of one's dignity. Aaron's claimed actions aren't the most alarming aspect of what Teyana disclosed. It's how swiftly she came to the realization that she was deserving of better and how forcefully she acted upon it. The second part of Teyana Taylor's explanation moved the emphasis from what actually occurred to what was discovered about power dynamics within the partnership. At this point, the narrative became structural rather than emotional. From Teyana's point of view, the betrayal was not one act. It was the knowledge that long before it ended, the relationship had been functioning unevenly. What she explains isn't a noteworthy event that would fit on a timeline. The imbalance accumulated gradually. She has stated that she started to notice how frequently she was the one expressing her emotions, providing clarification goals, preserving individual privacy, and taking in public opinion. She realized that the undefined area wasn't neutral, even though Aaron profited from it. It was beneficial. According to insiders, here is where she had her shift. According to reports, Teyana realized that she was being held to a level of accountability and openness that he wasn't supposed to reach. She was accused of being impetuous when she took decisive action. It was characterized as strategic when she remained silent. His silence was presented as a sign of dignity. It took time for that double standard to emerge. Slowly, it became apparent until she was unable to ignore it any longer. Those close to her claimed that the betrayal wasn't about classical definition of disloyalty. It was about permitting imbalance to continue, letting her bear the sole burden of the story, letting her reputation be contested while his was shielded, and most painfully letting he never needed to question her. Teyana has made it clear that she attempted to deal with this in private directly, without emotion or conflict. According to her, she raised worries about how people were viewing the relationship and the impact that was having on her. She didn't require control. It was reciprocal, a feeling that they were defending one another not preferentially, but equally. Insiders said that's when the misalignment became obvious. Instead of fostering mutual understanding, the reaction she got strengthened alienation, not harshness. Additionally, detachment can feel like abandonment when someone asks for mutual grounding. It indicates that one person's demands are being met in the partnership more easily than the others. This is when the meaning of the word betrayal changes. It has nothing to do with breaching a commitment. It had to do with never standing in one completely. Teyana has suggested that Aaron was maintaining optionality, but she felt they were creating something together. That posture difference doesn't always show up right away. Occasionally, it is only apparent when one individual requests alignment and the other person pauses. Reluctance, according to insiders, was the turning point. According to reports, Teyana realized that requesting balance would mean continuing to bargain for something that Teyana hold had been instinctive, and she has made this apparent. Love won't keep you going if it makes you justify why you should be treated equally. Now, fans are looking back. Observe how frequently Teyana served as the relationship's emotional interpreter, how she filled in the blanks, how she made stories more relatable, how she accepted ambiguity since she thought privacy was respected on all sides. That privacy didn't feel reciprocal in retrospect. It seemed to be selective. Self-betrayal is also mentioned at this stage of her epiphany. Teyana has admitted that she wanted the connection to be authentic in the way she felt. Therefore, she disregarded any initial discomfort. She has talked about how it's simple to justify imbalance when you have strong feelings for someone. Must convince yourself that understanding equates to love. That patience equates to maturity, and that stillness equates to strength. However, such defenses gradually fall apart. As stated, she didn't realize she was betraying herself by staying. Therefore, the betrayal wasn't complete to her. Insiders say that was a sobering realization. It put all she had put up with under Thegris's name. It made her realize that loyalty without a reciprocity is deterioration rather than virtue. She was unable to turn away from that once she had seen it. What's the lack of rage in her recounting is apparent in this phase. There isn't anger, but there is clarity, resolve, and disappointment. That absence is telling. It implies that leaving wasn't a reactionary decision, it was intentional. She didn't leave to discipline him. To stop, she moved away, lowering herself. The public narrative also started to feel insufficient at this point. They drifted off from the straightforward explanations. The reality was no longer caught by their differing desires. Teyana said that the disparity wasn't the problem. It was a disparity in accountability. The relationship's emotional and reputational foundation was supposed to be held by one individual. The other could stay undefinable. She discovered that an undefined is a position of authority. According to insiders, Teyana made a silent but firm choice to depart. No demands, no attempts to recapture the news, no public statements. She realized that staying would require her to accept a dynamic that required her to be adaptable while someone else remained safe. So she took a step back. Now, fans know why there was no untidy fallout. Drama vanishes when confusion is replaced by clarity. There is nothing else to dispute. Even if it is painful, the solution becomes clear. Furthermore, Teyana claims that after she realized what was going on, there was no longer a version of the relationship that matched her ideals. This her story doesn't accuse in this point. It explains why, in the absence of reciprocal accountability, love is insufficient, why privacy can actually act as a shield of a connection, why being quiet can isolate one individual while protecting another, and why leaving doesn't necessarily equate to abandonment. Occasionally, it's the first act of self-loyalty. One fact jumps out at the end of this chapter. Because Teyana was hurt, she stayed. She went because she recognized the cause of the pain and declined to continue normalizing it. Furthermore, once someone achieves that degree of clarity, no amount of affection, commitment, or public opinion can convince them to return to a relationship that calls for sacrificing oneself as a cost of remaining. The story was no longer about Pierre by the time Teyana Taylor got to the last part of revealing the truth. It was about what she took back as soon as she left. She didn't start doubting herself after this split. She was brought back to herself by this isolation. And it's that difference that gives everything she showed in such a disturbing way. Teyana claims that as soon as she left the relationship, the fog cleared up almost instantly. It was because the confusion vanished, not because the suffering did. She is no longer having to explain a lack of communication, defend an imbalance, or bargain for emotional reciprocity. Suddenly, the once heavy silence felt clean. That's when she realized something important. Long before it crushed her heart, the relationship had been consuming her mental energy. According to insiders, here is where the betrayal became completely apparent. In the aftermath, not in a covert act. In the speed at which Teyana's nervous system calmed down once she moved away. To the extent that she missed the emotional work she had been doing. In how evident it became the thing she had been carrying was never intended to be one. It tells you everything you need to know when relief surpasses sorrow. Teyana has talked about how hard it was to believe that love isn't enough to misalignment. She supported progress, communication, and patience. However, she realized that self-neglect results from patience that isn't reciprocated. Without a response, communication turns into self-betrayal. Furthermore, growth that only occurs on one side is erosion rather than growth. She identifies the cost at this point in her narrative. In an attempt to maintain the relationship's reputation, she cost herself tranquility. By overanalyzing situations that ought to have been normal, she deprived herself of sleep. She was expensive. She continually disregards her intuition in order to seem understanding, which is a sign of self. And it didn't make sense to stay after she honestly calculated those expenses. Her lack of resentment is what stands out the most. Teyana doesn't talk about Aaron with resentment. According to people who know her well, she describes the encounter with accuracy. He doesn't have to be mistaken for her to choose to be correct. Clarity like that is the result of profound inside alignment rather than emotional triumph. Additionally, she has admitted to her part in remaining longer than necessary, note as accountability rather than self-loathing. She acknowledges that she had hoped the relationship would be different. In her view, there was reciprocal caring even in the absence of mutual accountability. That belief wasn't stupid. It was optimistic. She discovered, however, that optimism is not a replacement for proof. As this stage developed, fans started to see why her departure was so subdued. Nothing else could be said. You don't require the other person's closure when you depart with clarity rather than rage. Internal closure takes place. To move on, Teyana didn't require a last discussion, an explanation in public, or an apology. She already knew all she needed to know. The story of treachery also develops at this point. According to Teyana, betrayal did not entail being dramatically wronged. In a partnership, it was about being abandoned and discovering that the person you believed to be standing next to you was fact standing behind their own interests in a calm, cozy, and non-malignant manner. She claims that it was this realization that ultimately caused her attachment to end. According to insiders, this stage signaled a shift in Teyana methodology. Relationships in general, emotional availability and emotional intensity are no longer confused by her. She no longer sees depth in quiet. She no longer thinks self-sacrifice is necessary for loyalty. Perhaps most significantly, she no longer looks for approval from others to validate her existing discomfort. She regained her confidence in herself. Although the public may have perceived her departure as abrupt or aloof, from her point of view, it was past due. It was the result of numerous minor instances where something wasn't quite right. She ignored a lot of her inner impulses. She reminded herself that concessions were only temporary. It wasn't an impulsive decision to leave. Once she stopped arguing with reality, it was unavoidable. What constitutes the reason this last stage is so potent is that accusations are avoided. There is resolution at the end. Erin is not subjected to audience judgment by She begs them to comprehend her decision, to realize that self-respect isn't always dramatic and betrayal isn't always loud. Walking away without trying to persuade anyone why